Out in the vast Siberian wilderness, there's a place so incredibly remote that, you won't find it on most maps. It's called Kegynet. It's a pretty desolate village, really just home to a few families of railway workers, and it was right here, on a single stretch of track cutting through the endless forest, that something happened. Something so horrific, it would haunt an entire nation for decades.
So picture this. It's the night of August 14th, 1989. Two brothers, Vadim and Igor Sopronko, are at the controls of a massive 70-car freight train rolling through the pitch-black Siberian taiga. Now these guys are seasoned drivers. They know this route like the back of their hand. But tonight something is terribly wrong. Way up ahead, their headlamp catches a glimpse of something on the tracks. Vadim just lays on the horn and slams the emergency brakes. But a train that heavy, well, it can't stop on a dime. They feel this series of sickening thuds, a sound of metal grinding against bone that I imagine will stay with them for the rest of their lives. When the train finally screeches to a halt, they grab their lanterns and step out into this chilling silence. It wasn't an animal. Scattered all over the rails were the dismembered bodies of human beings.
I mean, the scene was just a total nightmare. As police and local villagers arrived, they started the grim task of trying to identify the remains. Turns out the victims were 7 teenage boys: Dmitry, Nikolai, Vadim, Oleg, Vyacheslav, Roman, and Victor. All of them just 15 years old. They were all close friends, just coming home from a weekend camping trip, gathering cedar cones out in the forest.
The speed with which the local police came to a conclusion was, well, it was staggering. Their official theory was simple and honestly completely bizarre. They claimed that these 7 boys must have missed their 10:40 p.m. train, gotten exhausted from their trip, and just decided to lie down and fall asleep right on the railway tracks. Just a case of tragic misfortune. But the evidence, it just screamed otherwise. The drivers were clear. The bodies looked as if they had been deliberately placed in a line. Toxicology reports came back. No alcohol, no drugs in their systems at all. And then there were their backpacks. They were found 250 meters away from the bodies, placed neatly, side by side, right along the track. I mean, who in a state of utter exhaustion would possibly do that?
For the families of these 7 boys, they were just devastated. Not just by the loss, but by the insulting absurdity of the official story. They knew their sons. These weren't reckless kids. They were healthy, responsible teenagers. The families flat out refused to accept the accident story. They were convinced their children had been murdered.
For 2 agonizing years, they pleaded with local authorities to just do a proper investigation, but they were met with a total wall of silence. You have to remember, this was during the chaotic final days of the Soviet Union, and their pleas were just lost in this crumbling bureaucracy. Phone calls went unanswered. When they demanded to see the evidence, they were told, oh, it's been lost or it's been misplaced. It became pretty clear the local police had zero interest in finding the truth.
So by 1991, with every other option exhausted, the families took this monumental step. At a time of huge political upheaval, as the Soviet Union was literally collapsing, they wrote a letter directly to the new Russian president, Boris Yeltsin. It was a desperate, final plea for justice, a total shot in the dark, just begging him to force a real investigation into their sons' deaths.
And incredibly, against all odds, the letter actually worked. The president's office responded, and the case was officially reopened. But this time, it wasn't going to be handled by the local guys. 2 of Moscow's absolute top investigators, Vladimir Guzenkov and Yuri Stolarov, were sent to Kegynet. Guzenkov in particular had this reputation for solving the most tangled, most difficult cases imaginable. Guzenkov and Stolarov arrived at a crime scene that was 2 years old, where pretty much all the physical evidence had been washed away by time and weather. They had to start completely from scratch. Their first, and I'm sure grim task, was getting permission from the families to exhume the boys' bodies for a second proper autopsy. And this is where the case truly broke wide open. The forensic examination revealed a horrifying truth. The boys were already dead before the train hit them. They had been brutally beaten to death. The evidence showed severe blunt force trauma, fractured skulls, broken jaws, and deep wounds all over their bodies. This was no accident. This was a straight-up massacre. The forensic experts started analyzing the wounds, and they figured out the types of weapons that were used. The tool marks on the bones, they were consistent with things like hammers, wrenches, and other heavy tools, exactly the kinds of things you'd find in any railway depot. The killers were almost certainly local railway workers. So, the investigators started re-interviewing every single person in that tiny village. And under this intense questioning, a local railway lineman, he finally broke. Riddled with guilt, he confessed everything. And he revealed the mastermind behind the entire horrific crime, a senior police lieutenant named Nikolai, who just happened to be visiting relatives in Kegynet that night. The lineman's confession, it painted this chilling picture. That night, a group of local men, including him, a guy named Vasily and his brothers, and the vacationing cop, Nikolai, they were all drinking heavily. Bored in this desolate village, they ran out of booze and went looking for marijuana. They didn't find any, but they did find the 7 boys, waiting for their train. Nikolai, the police officer, drunkenly and completely falsely accused the boys of tampering with a railway signal wire. An argument started. When one of the boys knocked Nikolai down, he just snapped. He ordered the other men to kill them all and cover it up. What happened next was just a brutal, merciless slaughter. Then, Nikolai used his police knowledge to stage the whole scene as an accident. 6 years later, in 1995, the killers were tried, found guilty, and sentenced to death. But believe me, the story was far from over.
Just as the families thought they had finally found some kind of justice, politics got in the way. In 1996, Russia was getting ready to join the Council of Europe, and that move required them to abolish the death penalty. A high-ranking Supreme Court official used this political shift as a loophole, filing an appeal to have the murderers' sentences overturned, and unbelievably, the court agreed, and the killers, they were all set free. The consequences were immediate, and they were terrifying. Once he was freed, one of the killers, Vasily, attacked his own cousin, who was a potential witness. Then, another one of the murderers was found dead under very mysterious circumstances. But most chilling of all, a lineman who had helped police recover the boys' remains way back in 1989 was himself found killed and dismembered on the very same stretch of track.
Even after a decade of fighting, of suffering, of being intimidated, the families refused to give up. They had just come too far. So in 1999, they appealed to the Prosecutor General's office one last time. Citing this trail of death that was following the killer's release, they successfully argued for the case to be reopened a third time. For 4 more years, the investigation went on. Bodies were exhumed again. Over 100 people were interviewed. And through all of it, the families held on, driven by the memory of their 7 sons, whose lives were cut short by an act of just unimaginable, senseless violence. Finally, in 2003, 14 years after the murders, a final verdict was reached. The men were found guilty, once again. But the sentences, they were a total shock. Nikolai, the police lieutenant and the mastermind, got just 10 years. Vasily, one of the primary attackers, only 7. For these families, after a lifetime of fighting, it felt like a profound injustice. And get this, after his initial release in 1996, Nikolai actually became a municipal deputy, a local politician. Even after his final conviction, he showed absolutely no remorse, continuing to appeal his sentence and trying to portray himself as the victim of some kind of frame-up. The Kegynet case is such a chilling story of senseless brutality, but it's also this powerful testament to the perseverance of 7 families who just refused to be silenced. They battled corruption, apathy, and a legal system that failed them at almost every single turn, all to make sure the world would know what really happened on that dark Siberian night. It really leaves us with a difficult question, doesn't it? When the very system designed to protect you is the source of the crime, where do you even begin to turn for justice?